It was a risk, and it was based on fishing. But now, many years later, and as I was working at Trout Unlimited, one of the things I realized was when I was coming out of business school and I was working at Disney, I was working for big organizations. I was on the corporate track, and I wanted to have more of an impact. So what you realize, and when I went to the nonprofit world, and many people who are listening to this probably understand that, CEOs, is you have to have a multitude of skills and you have a major impact. And even though I wasn't at the CEO level, I was in the C-suite when I came over very early in my career. I was in my early 30s. So I was able to have an impact right away. So I could take all the skills that I learned from Walt Disney and then my finance skills from Wall Street and my MBA and apply those in a business way at a nonprofit.
This is Associations Thrive, the podcast celebrating successful associations and their leaders. I'm your host, Joanna Pineda, CEO and Chief Troublemaker at Matrix Group International. Listen in as top association executives tell all, revealing the creative and innovative ways they're increasing membership, generating revenue, nurturing engagement, and reimagining their organizations. By the way, if you've launched a new initiative, created new member services, or updated your governance structure and are seeing great results, I want to hear your story, and so do my listeners. I'd love to have you as a guest. Go to podcast.matrixgroup.net and apply to be on Associations Thrive. Now let's dive into this week's show. Today, I'm speaking with Kenneth Mendez, President and CEO of the Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America, or AAFA. Kenny, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Joanna. Pleasure to be here.
So, Kenny, tell us about AAFA.
Well, we are the oldest and largest nonprofit patient group representing the 100 million Americans with some form of allergic disease. So that could be asthma, food allergies, eczema, those kinds of immune system responses. They're all related.
Kenny, I never thought of asthma as being related to allergies. How are they related?
Well, asthma is a reaction, an overreaction by your lungs and your airways to particulate matter, to allergens that come in. And so let's back up for a second and talk about allergies in general. Allergies are an immune system response. So you can be allergic to dust mites, to pollen, to food, and your immune system overreacts to that, which is why you get a runny nose, coughing, hives. It can be other things where your body and your immune system is reacting to those triggers. There's something called allergic asthma, which is asthma caused by seasonal allergies and that kind of allergies. That's the way those things are related. There are other forms of asthma that are not driven by allergies, but the predominantly largest one is allergic asthma. So again, it's an immune system response. So with asthma, the symptoms are coughing, trouble breathing. For people who don't have asthma, it's like breathing through a straw. It's very challenging to take in breaths. So it's really important, A, to understand what your triggers are. If you have asthma, if it's seasonal allergies, then you've got to reduce your exposure to those seasonal allergies.
Kenny, is the number of people who have some kind of asthma or allergy increasing in the United States?
I don't know what it used to be, but let me flip that and say, there are 100 million Americans with some form of allergic disease. 26 million of those people have asthma, but the allergy seasons have gotten longer and more intense because of climate change. So one of the things that I hear all the time from people are, I've never had allergies before and I suddenly have allergies, or my allergies are a lot worse than they were before. And that's because with climate change, the growing season starts much sooner because it's warmer. And then it ends much later because it's warmer. And the first frost normally kills the fall allergens, which is the primary culprit is ragweed. So that accounts for the longer growing seasons. The more intense pollen releases come from the additional carbon dioxide in the air, which comes from climate change also. So if you put grass, for example, in a container and you pump it with carbon dioxide, it accelerates the growth of pollen release. So that's why you have longer and more intense allergy seasons, because it's warmer, longer growing seasons, and more intense because of the carbon dioxide releases that impact plants.
Well, it's interesting you talk about that because my younger son has a lot of seasonal allergies plus food allergies. And I never had allergies, but a couple of years ago, I went to the doctor because I couldn't breathe. And she said, "Oh, I'm seeing a lot of people like you." And she said, I can't remember. She said, "We've had the worst pollen count ever. And so people like you who say they don't have allergies suddenly have allergies."
No, that's absolutely right. And that's part of what we do and what I do is for our organization. We want to make sure we get the word out there. A lot of people don't realize that if you have asthma, 10 people die each day from asthma, so it can be fatal.
Wow.
And there are people who go undiagnosed for asthma because they try and push through it or they think it's seasonal allergies. So that's why it's really important. We always say go see your specialist, an allergist or a pulmonologist, to figure out if you have asthma or if you have seasonal allergies.
Wow. Well, I think we have a lot to talk about when it comes to AAFA. But before we do that, let's talk about your journey. So how do you get to become president and CEO of AAFA?
Okay, Joanna, if you want a true answer to that question, I've made all my life decisions based on fishing and fly fishing.
Oh,
I'm an avid fly fisherman. Early in my career, I was on the corporate track. I went to business school, got my MBA, moved out to Los Angeles and I worked on Wall Street even before my MBA. And then I moved out to Los Angeles to work for Walt Disney, but I wanted to go out west because the fishing's better out there. But I overshot the Rocky Mountain West and ended up working at Walt Disney. But I was always involved in a nonprofit conservation organization as a volunteer called Trout Unlimited.
Yep.
So it's a conservation group that conserves rivers and streams. And they happened to need a business guy. The CEO was a lawyer, but they needed someone who had business skills, the kind of business skills I had, both finance and marketing, because I was working at Walt Disney out in LA. So I never thought I'd be in the nonprofit world, but I moved back east in the early 90s, right when the movie A River Runs Through It came out. But I left the corporate world to go work for Trout Unlimited as their chief operating officer in the early 90s. And I had one kid at the time who was born in Los Angeles. Then I had two more sons. My oldest son was born in LA. Then I had two more sons, and we ended up here in the DC area. Now, I was going fishing on all my business trips. That's what my family will tell people. But it was fun because I go visit rivers and streams and visit with our volunteers in the field, take donors out fishing. Now, meanwhile, the kids who were born here, my middle son had severe food allergies and asthma. And then my next son, the youngest, also had severe food allergies and asthma. The youngest one could not eat beef, dairy, peanuts, and eggs. And he was on a severely restricted diet.
Wow.
So we lived that as a family. And while my wife was home dealing with all these food allergies and the kids, I was off fishing. But at any rate, that's how I ended up in the nonprofit world. And then after about 15 years in my Trout Unlimited job, my wife said I had to get a real job because she did feel like I was going fishing on all my business trips. And that's how I ended up in healthcare. I moved to a trade association that represents the medical device industry. So that's how I learned about healthcare. I was in senior leadership there. And then the job opened up at AAFA, the CEO job. I'd never been in the CEO seat before. But because my kids had severe food allergy and asthma, and we lived through this, and I have allergies and asthma, then it was a natural fit for me. So that's how I ended up at AAFA.
Kenny, I got a zillion questions. So let me start with the first one. You were at Disney. The job opened up at Trout Unlimited. What was that like to go from for-profit to nonprofit? And how'd you decide to make the leap? It's different.
It was a risk, and it was based on fishing. But now, many years later, And as I was working at Trout Unlimited, one of the things I realized was when I was coming out of business school and I was working at Disney, I was working for big organizations. I was on the corporate track and I wanted to have more of an impact. So what you realize, and when I went to the nonprofit world, and many people who are listening to this probably understand that, CEOs, is you have to have a multitude of skills and you have a major impact. And even though I wasn't at the CEO level, I was in the C-suite when I came over very early in my career. I was in my early 30s. So I was able to have an impact right away. So I could take all the skills that I learned from Walt Disney and then my finance skills from Wall Street and my MBA and apply those in a business way at a nonprofit. So actually the transition was quite easy because I could make a lot of decisions and do a lot of things using the skills I had developed prior to getting into the nonprofit world. I'd say the other piece that a lot of people might identify with is the mission-based aspect of nonprofits. What I struggled with early in my career, both on Wall Street and at Disney, was that I was very mission-focused. Even though Disney was about the mouse and entertainment, and there's a really strong culture there, it was still about making money for the company. And so coming to a nonprofit, I try and maximize the business opportunities for the nonprofit and then take that and put it right back into mission-oriented work. And all the people who have worked at Trout Unlimited, who work at AAFA, are all the same way. They're very mission-oriented. At TU, Trout Unlimited, we used to sit around talking about fishing. At AAFA, we sit around talking about our asthma and allergies.
And then from AdvaMed to go to the CEO position at AAFA, how do you prepare yourself for that top spot?
Yeah, I think that trial by fire. I had really good training at AdvaMed because being in the C-suite, I worked with a board quite a bit, but I was more internally focused. So I was doing strategic planning, running the business operations. So what I had to learn in the CEO job is really being more externally focused. So some of the advocacy work, I do a lot of media work as well. So that was new to me. But I also think that being a CEO and communicating, you have to understand what the issues are and boil them down into very simple terms. And I think that if you're supporting a CEO, a lot of times, and I've been there, you feel like you need to have all the answers so the CEO can answer in a simple way. So the nice thing about being CEO is that I can try and boil things down to simple terms based on, the people around me could explain to me what the issues are. So I think that was part of the adjustment coming to being a CEO. And it was actually refreshing for me because I didn't feel like I needed to have all the answers all the time, but I just needed to be able to understand something and communicate it in a simple way.
And then you need a great team who can get the answers and support you.
Yes, absolutely.
Kenny, October is Filipino-American History Month, and you're Filipino-American like me.
Yes.
What does it mean to you to be Filipino-American?
Well, I can answer that in a number of ways. One is, my parents are no longer alive, but I owe a lot to them in terms of their values of education and family and commitment and loyalty. I think there are a lot of those qualities. In addition to liking to dance and eating food, which was very much part of what we did growing up. I was born in the States, but my father came to the States because he was working for the United Nations. I come from a family that had been dedicated in the Philippines to service through education or through diplomacy. And so I think that that's had an influence on me and what my career choices are and what I have done here in the US. I think being born in the early 60s and then growing up in the 70s, that I wasn't around that many Filipinos where I grew up on Long Island. So there was an element of discrimination, which I think is always hard. And I was really hoping that by the time my kids were older, my wife's American, so my kids don't look Filipino. Sometimes they're construed as Hispanic, but what I still see is that there's still discrimination around, and that bothers me because I believe that when I was younger, hopefully as I got older, that would go away. And that really bothers me that that's still around, that we have to deal with that, whether it's Asians, Filipinos, Black Americans, Hispanics. That is a real challenge for me because America is all about diversity. I just hope that we would have outgrown that.
Kenny, growing up, my mom was always focused on the professions, what kind of job you're going to have, doctor, lawyer, engineer, accountant. And I don't think there was ever an emphasis on like being in the nonprofit sector, for example. And I know like I'm part of this ASAE group called the AANHPI community group. And there's not many of us in the association community. So what would you say to other Filipino Americans about being in this profession, the association and nonprofit profession?
I think to other Filipino Americans, what I'd say is the mission work of nonprofits and associations could be very appealing as a career alternative and as a culture and environment to be in, because I hate to make generalizations, but I do feel it's true. The family unit, what it's like to grow up being Filipino and being committed to a cause and putting others ahead of yourself. And I think that that's the culture that you could find in nonprofits where people are giving. They always want to help others. People say, and I think it's probably true, that the Philippines exports nursing care.
Oh, God, yes.
And that is, I think, because maybe our culture is wired for that. And so nonprofits aren't that dissimilar from that, where you're caring for others in terms of your mission. You really care about a cause and you want to advocate for that and help that cause.
I love that. And Kenny, here's a stat for you. I read an article that said 50% of nursing grads in the Philippines come to the U.S.
Yeah.
And if you go to some hospitals, you know that they would collapse without the Filipino nurses.
Yeah, absolutely. A good friend of mine, college roommate, just had open heart surgery. So I went in and I stayed with him in his recovery room and his entry, and there were Filipino nurses there. And I just felt really comfortable. They were terrific. They were on the ball. They're very understanding. They listened, and I was grateful to have them. And my friend, my college roommate, he's come out terrific from that surgery.
Glad to hear it. Kenny, what's your favorite Filipino food?
My favorite Filipino food, well, the one that I can cook that is easy is chicken nilaga, so boiled chicken, right?
Oh, all right.
But I like bagoong.
Oh, good job.
But I can't get that often.
You can get it at the Asian markets here, but then it stinks up your whole house.
Yeah.
Well, Kenny, let's turn to AAFA. You have a lot of research on your website. Do you fund the research? How does this research get done?
Yeah, I think we get funded to do that research. I mean, our vision is to be the trusted ally and to amplify the patient voice and to advocate for patients so they're equipped to make decisions, or that we have policies that are in place that help our community. So some of the research we do on a broad scale, for example, we put out reports like our Asthma Capitals Report or our Allergy Capitals Report, where we look at the 100 largest cities and the ones that are most challenging to live in with either asthma or allergies. That gets a lot of press, but when we talk about those reports for the allergy capitals, for example, we say the rankings are based on pollen release, over-the-counter medication usage, and access to specialists. So I get to explain why those three criteria are really important for people who have allergies and why policymakers need to be aware of that. So clean air, climate change, those kinds of things are things we can amplify there. With our Asthma Capitals Report, we use three criteria: mortality, prevalence, and then emergency room visits. So we get to tell people, asthma can be fatal. 10 people die each day from asthma. Emergency room visits can be high from asthma. And then certainly prevalence, if you don't take care of it, you can end up in the emergency room or die. So we message around that. The other thing I'd say in terms of reports, we did an asthma disparities report, which is a strategic focus of ours. And that was a 15-year update. We had first done the report in 2005. then released it in 2020. And the disparities haven't changed, even though there are significant improvements in the therapies and medications for asthma. But Black Americans are still 3 times more likely to die from asthma, 5 times more likely to be treated in an emergency room, and Black women have the highest mortality rate of any gender or ethnic group. So the focus on asthma disparities, the focus on climate change and seasonal allergies all have a disproportionate impact on certain communities, and we try and help fix that.
Kenny, you just said a mouthful, so let me step back. First of all, who is doing the research? Is it people on your staff, or are they academics that you're funding? Who's doing this work?
Our team does it. We have a head of research and a research manager who does all the work related to that. We also do research in our community. So sometimes we will be approached by folks who want to understand the patient voice. So we'll pull together a sample of people from our community who will then be the patient voice, whether they're developing, a manufacturer wants to develop a new therapy, or they want to understand how people live with allergic disease. So we use our community, amplify their voice, and our team, our staff interfaces with them. The NIH kind of studies, the IRB, that's a technical term, I think a research term. We are subcontractors of that, or we will be on advisory panels, given our expertise for that kind of research. So it really depends on who wants to do the research. We'll do it ourselves, or we'll be subcontractors or participants in the research.
Well, Kenny, I'm interested in your asthma capitals research, and there are a lot of Northeast cities on that list. Why is that?
I think for a couple of reasons. One is when you think about disparities and you think about what the triggers are, so prevalence, mortality, emergency room visits, there are some areas, so we look at the 100 largest cities, and some of those cities in the Northeast are in locations where there's poor quality air. Because of social determinants of health as well, asthma is higher prevalence. So for example, let's take Allentown, Pennsylvania, which was number 1 on the asthma capitals list 2 years in a row. They have a high proportion of, first off, Puerto Rican Americans who've migrated there, and that I think has driven up the prevalence rate there because Puerto Rican Americans are 2 times more likely to be diagnosed with asthma. And then I think there are some pockets there in Allentown that have not very good health care. So we're trying to fix that. And then they're also in a valley where a lot of the poor air quality settles around the Allentown area. So, that's an example of a mix in Allentown, which was number 1. You've got Cleveland, Ohio, which isn't in the Northeast, but it's in the Midwest. There are 3 cities in Ohio. Again, so you've got the Rust Belt states, and then that air moves east. And then, you think about the traffic and the highways, I-95, the I-95 corridor, there's a lot of pollution there, and then that could be a driver for asthma.
So it sounds like it's a combination of environmental factors, climate change, and then health disparities.
Yes.
And I know that health impact and health disparities is a big strategic focus. So what are you all doing to mitigate some of these health disparities? I mean, we've been struggling with this for a long time, but the stats are terrible.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked that because we did the HEAL report, and then what evolved out of that HEAL report is what can we do to have sustainable change? We're not reinventing the wheel, but we're doing things a little bit different. We launched our Health Equity Advancement and Leadership Program. It's called HEAL, that's the acronym. So we have partnered with community-based asthma programs. We've raised money as a national organization and funded and partnered with community-based asthma programs to help improve asthma outcomes. The secret sauce and part of that, I believe, is community health workers. So when community health workers go visit families or communities with asthma, they can identify what the triggers are in the home and provide better education. So when you understand what the triggers are and you better understand how you manage your asthma, then that can reduce emergency room visits and improve outcomes. The key in this is that we would love to have those community health workers reimbursed through Medicaid or through insurance companies. So that's sustainable. So we developed the data and we've shown in the cities that we've launched in, we're in about 7 cities right now. 6, we've got 2 or 3 years worth of data in it. We're launching in other ones. The data shows that reduced emergency room visits, improved health outcomes, improved presenteeism at work and school, reduced absenteeism. A lot of people don't realize that asthma is one of the number one reasons for missed school days in the school environment. So to the extent that we can make a dent in these communities, I mean, if you think about absenteeism in underserved communities, that puts them back even more, because if a kid's absent from school, that means their caregiver is probably also missing work. And so that sets them behind a lot.
Well, it sounds like there are issues about this that you're advocating on, and advocacy is very prominent on your website. So what types of issues do you advocate on?
Yeah, so one of the main things that we advocate on is federal funding, for example, for the CDC's National Asthma Control Program, which is a program that tries to create incentives and gives funding to states to work on a local basis to improve asthma. We also advocate for, we had 2 different laws passed under 2 different administrations. One was based on school-based asthma and allergies, the School-Based Respiratory and Asthma and Allergies Act, and then the other one was related to food allergies. So those kinds of federal legislation are ways that we've been able to help our communities. We're also trying to do state-based legislation as well on a periodic basis. We don't have the bandwidth because we're fairly small, but we will hear from our community and someone will say, can you help support this bill? And we've done that, or we've partnered with groups to improve, for example, training and education about anaphylaxis in preschool and daycare settings, where there are not regulations around that right now. There are regulations for K through 12, but not for under the kindergarten age. So that's where we partner on a state basis, because there's no federal regulations around that.
I'm curious about something on the website related to sesame allergens. I actually listened to a podcast about this. Why is sesame suddenly so big?
Well, sesame's been around for a while as an allergen. Thank you for asking that, because as part of that second piece of legislation, we got it listed as the 9th allergen. There are 12 allergens. Like if you go to Europe or Canada, Australia, there are 12 allergens that are listed that are required to be labeled on packaging, or if you're in a restaurant. Sesame has always been around as one of them. And so there was enough data that we were able to convince Congress to pass this and to list sesame as the 9th allergen. So it's not recent. I mean, it's been around for a while. I think there's still research going on why there are food allergies to begin with. That's the unanswered question. There's some theories around that. There's no cure right now. There are some treatments that will desensitize you to some of these allergens, but certainly sesame has been around for a while. It was just listed here in the US because the US has been slower on that. If you go to the EU, there are many more.
Kenny, what is the end goal for AAFA? What's the world that you envision, and how do we get there?
Our end goal, our vision, is to be the trusted ally for our community. And we want to reduce hospitalizations. We want to reduce death from asthma, mortality from asthma. So to the extent that we can be a partner, a trusted ally, where people will understand how to manage their allergic disease, how to manage their asthma, we hope that that will reduce death and hospitalizations, and in particular in communities that are disproportionately impacted by asthma. So that's really the end game for us. We believe that by being that trusted ally, for example, once someone's in our community, I'll use this example because we do research in our community. I think the vaccination rate for the average in America is around 47%. Once you're in the AAFA community, if you register on our website, you subscribe to something, we know your vaccination rate's about 74%.
Wow.
And so that being the trusted ally and coming into our community, they realize that, you should get vaccinated from the flu, because flu can be a significant trigger and can cause harm to you and even death if you have asthma. So this is long before COVID. Flu was our major concern. So that's why, being the trusted ally, we know that if people are in our community, they trust us, they know about us, then they can better manage their allergic disease and hopefully reduce death and hospitalizations.
Kenny, how does one join the community and become part of it?
They can visit our website, AAFA.org, and join and sign up. There's a button on the front page. You can join our community. It's completely free. It's email and password protected. So once you join, you get a password. Our community is monitored by staff. We've got a medical scientific council. We've got an Ask the Allergist feature there. So if you want to ask a question or you want to talk to others who have asthma and allergies, then that's a great place to go to get support. Like, I remember when my kids were young and, you're diagnosed with food allergies for your kid, you don't know how to put a meal on the table, you don't know what to do next. And having a support group and having access to those kinds of resources is what we do as an organization, as part of our nonprofit work.
Kenny, as someone who has a son with lots of food allergies and as someone who has sometimes asthma, thank you for your work. I hope you'll come back in the future and tell us about all the great work that you're doing.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be on here, and I hope this helps our community and your community.
Thanks for listening to Associations Thrive. We're so glad to have you here. My personal mission and the mission of my company, Matrix Group International, is to help associations and nonprofits increase membership, generate revenue, and thrive in the digital space. I want to hear stories of how your organization is thriving in today's challenging landscape. Please apply to be on my show by going to podcast.matrixgroup.net. By the way, do you need help with a digital initiative? Maybe it's a website redesign, a new membership database, or a hybrid meeting that you're planning. I'd love to connect with you. Please visit the Matrix Group website at matrixgroup.net. Thanks again for listening to this week's episode of Associations Thrive. Don't forget to subscribe to the show, leave a 5-star rating, post a comment, and share it with your colleagues and friends. Bye!